History has a strange way of teaching us lessons. It doesn't always shout, it whispers, it nudges, it surprises. And, if we pay attention, these lessons can save us from repeating mistakes that have cost generations before us fortunes, security, and sometimes even their livelihoods. Today, I want to take you on a journey through 5 of the greatest financial disasters in history. These aren't just stories about money disappearing. They are stories about human greed, hope, fear, and the powerful lessons we can learn to guide our own financial decisions. But before we dive in, if you want to explore history's most dramatic mistakes, learn from them, and avoid them in your own life, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss these kinds of stories. Now, let's step into the past and uncover the first disaster. Imagine Paris in the early 1700s. The streets are alive with chatter, people carrying papers and talking excitedly about John Law, a man who had convinced the French government to allow him to manage the country's finances. Law promised a new era of wealth through a trading company tied to the Mississippi region of North America. People were enchanted by the idea that investing in shares could multiply their fortunes overnight. Families sold their homes, jewels, and anything of value to buy these shares. Cafes were filled with laughter, champagne, and dreams of instant riches. But behind the glittering promises was a stark reality. The company's profits couldn't justify the soaring prices, and many of the promised colonial riches simply didn't exist. For a time, no one wanted to believe it. The story was too good to question. And then, as quickly as it had risen, the bubble burst. People rushed to sell, prices collapsed, fortunes vanished, and France was left in financial chaos. The lesson? Stories may inspire, but reality sustains. When hype outpaces substance, disaster is inevitable. Even today, whether it's viral investments or online trends, we must remember, don't invest in the story alone. Look for the value behind it. Almost a century later, Britain faced its own mania, though this time the excitement was fueled by steel tracks and steam engines. The 1840s British railway mania swept across the nation. Ordinary people, tradesmen, and even farmers poured their savings into railway companies. The newspapers promised that railways would transform Britain, making investors rich beyond imagination. Everyone wanted to own a part of the future, but behind the excitement, many of these railway projects were unrealistic. Lines were planned where there was no demand, and companies overpromised returns they couldn't possibly deliver. When the market finally realized the absurdity, share prices collapsed, leaving countless investors bankrupt. The lesson here is timeless. Don't follow the crowd blindly. Excitement can be contagious, but doing your research, checking the facts, and asking tough questions protects you from the fallout. Trends may be flashy, but facts always matter. Fast forward to the 1970s, when the world faced something different, economic confusion that seemed impossible at the time. Imagine waking up every day to rising prices for gas, food, and rent, while jobs disappeared and factories closed. This was the era of stagflation, a period of simultaneous high inflation and unemployment. Economists had long believed that such a combination couldn't happen, but the reality proved them wrong. Oil-producing nations cut supplies, sending energy prices skyrocketing. Governments attempted to stimulate the economy with more spending, but it only fueled inflation. Families struggled to make ends meet, balancing budgets that no longer worked. The lesson here isn't about numbers or economic theory. It's about preparation and humility. Life rarely goes according to plan. Whether in national economies or personal finances, assuming everything will always go smoothly is a dangerous gamble. Prepare for multiple outcomes, because uncertainty is the only certainty. Meanwhile, in Japan during the 1980s, the streets of Tokyo glittered with neon lights and unbridled optimism. Property values soared to astronomical levels, with Tokyo land rumored to be worth more than all the real estate in California. Stock markets climbed higher and higher. People bought homes not to live in, but to sell later for profit. Banks were generous, loans were easy to get, and everyone felt unstoppable. But as with all bubbles fueled by speculation and easy credit, the end was inevitable. When the government tightened interest rates, borrowing slowed, prices fell, and suddenly, the sky-high investments were worth far less than the loans used to buy them. Some families spent decades repaying mortgages on homes that were worth less than the original loan. The stock market crashed, and Japan entered what became known as the lost decade. The lesson is as relevant today as it was then. Leverage can magnify your gains, but it can also magnify your losses. Debt is a tool, not a guarantee, and when overused, it can destroy even the strongest foundations. Always be cautious about how much you borrow, and never mistake rising prices for permanent wealth. Then came the 2008 global financial crisis, a disaster that many of us remember vividly. Skyscrapers gleamed in cities around the world, and the financial sector seemed invincible. Banks were lending to people who couldn't afford to repay, bundling these risky mortgages into complex financial products and selling them globally as safe investments. Housing prices had risen steadily for decades, rates, and the belief that they could never fall became a dangerous assumption. But eventually, people stopped paying their mortgages. Housing prices plummeted, financial institutions collapsed, and the stock markets around the world crashed. Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. Governments scrambled to bail out failing banks, and millions of people lost their jobs, homes, and savings. The lesson from 2008 is clear and personal. If you don't understand where your money is going, don't invest in it. Complexity can mask danger. Authority and popularity do not guarantee safety. Ask questions. Be aware. Knowledge is your first line of defense against financial disaster. As we look across these 5 disasters, from the Mississippi bubble to railway mania, from stagflation to Japan's asset bubble, and finally the 2008 crisis, we notice a pattern. None of these events were just about numbers or markets. They were about people, their dreams, their fears, their beliefs, and their mistakes. They teach us that we are vulnerable to stories that feel true, to excitement that clouds judgment, to optimism that ignores reality, and to complexity that hides risk. But more importantly, they show us that we can learn. We can prepare, question, and think critically. We can plan for the unexpected, use debt wisely, and never stop learning. The mistakes of the past are not meant to scare us. They are meant to guide us. And while financial disasters can seem distant or abstract, their lessons apply to all of us today. Every time we invest, make a large purchase, or take on debt, we face the same human emotions and decision-making traps as those who came before us. History reminds us that greed can blind, that confidence can mislead, and that preparation is invaluable. If we heed these stories, if we recognize the lessons behind them, we can navigate our own financial decisions with wisdom rather than panic, with insight rather than impulse. So, the next time you hear about a hot investment, a sudden market trend, or a guaranteed opportunity, pause. Think of the people in Paris who sold everything for shares that weren't backed by reality. Remember the investors rushing to buy railways that didn't make sense. Recall the families struggling during stagflation, the Japanese homeowners crushed by overleverage, and the millions affected by the 2008 crash. Let these stories guide your decisions. Let them remind you that financial success isn't about following hype. It's about understanding, preparation, patience, and prudence. In the end, the beauty of history is that it doesn't just tell us what went wrong. It tells us how to do better. It teaches us that even in the face of human error, greed, and unforeseen events, we can make choices that protect us, that grow our wealth responsibly, and that avoid the pitfalls of those who came before. And perhaps the most important lesson of all is that we are capable of learning, adapting, and thriving if we pay attention. So, which story resonates with you the most? Was it the glittering illusions of Paris, the railways that promised dreams, the economic chaos of stagflation, the rise and fall of Tokyo real estate, or the global upheaval of 2008? Whatever your takeaway, remember this: history whispers its warnings for a reason. Listen carefully, learn diligently, and you can write your own story of financial wisdom rather than regret.